ICQ Podcast episode 437, The Incredible Story of G2NM Mike. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 437th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported this episode by our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin M1MRB, Chris Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, Frank K4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is the incredible story of G2NM Mike. Well, as mentioned, your ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast is only achievable and possible by the kind support of our donors, and our monthly subscription donors have helped us to create this show for you today and keep your show for you advert free. If you enjoyed the show and got something from it, there's a great way you can show that appreciation. You go to icqpodcast.com/donate, select one of the two very easy donation options there on that page, and you can either set up a one-off or a subscription donation to support your amateur radio show. So I say, please feel free to visit that page and show your very kind support. Right, well, now we join Martin, Chris, Martin, Frank, Bill and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including Solar Cycle 25 produces record sunspots and UK license validation. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 437 of the ICQ podcast and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Martin. Hi, guys.
Yeah, good to see you again. I'm also joined by Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, who I managed to wind up this morning on the radio.
You wind me up every day. It's all good. I hit the link button on my radio just to wake the hotspot up. And I forget when I hit the link button, it actually sends a message out to everybody. You called me before I even turned the volume up properly, but hello.
Yeah, good to have you. Moving to the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin. Hey, everybody. It's great to be back again.
Yeah, great to have you as always, and I'm sure it'll be a fun one. Staying your side of the pond, we have Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Martin. Good evening, everybody.
He's with us. He's here by popular demand. Leslie Butterfields, G0CIB. Hi, Leslie.
Oh, good evening, Martin. What can I say?
Well, as I say, we have some interesting discussions at times. And
I know. Infamy. They got it in for me.
Yeah, they got it in for you. Yeah, and sometimes it's a shame because we have a clean rating or whatever. We can't always put out what we giggle about before we start. Still, never mind. Right, first news story. Cycle 25, Solar Cycle 25 is producing high record of sunspots. Frank, I'm going to go to you first. What do you think on this? Because I know you've done a lot of work with your friend Scott McIntosh on this. So what do you think?
Well, this article is by Frank Donovan, W3LPL, very well-known contester and somebody who certainly understands propagation, and so it's very well written. And, the K7 RA solar report that the ARRL letter puts out, he even their editor notes that the numbers are even larger than or higher than what Frank Donovan put out. My take on it is they're just now noticing, since they're so tied into NOAA and NASA, hey, the actual solar maximum numbers here are much higher than were predicted. Now, of course, Scott McIntosh and his team have predicted that earlier. So it's no surprise to those who are familiar with the McIntosh team projections, but it's good to have what we might call the institutionalists among us, very well read, very knowledgeable scholars of this, are recognizing that Solar Cycle 25 is not just going to be a copycat of 24.
Yeah, it does look good, Frank. As I say, I think some interesting things are coming out of this. Bill, what's your thoughts?
I agree with what Frank's saying. Likewise, I can just, affirm with everyone else. The bands have been hot. 10 meters has had openings, quite a bit of success on 12 and 15 meters recently. So the bands are hot, and it's way better than they were predicting originally, except Frank and I know the alternative prediction method that Dr. McIntyre was putting out there. So get on the band. Even, one brief story that wasn't in this article. We had a couple flares, real good ones, some high level M's and a couple X's, and they wiped the bands out, but they recovered way quicker than I remember in the past. So, if you get on and there's some solar flare activity and the bands are dead, give it a few hours and try again. It's not like other events in the past where the bands were dead for days. There was one contest weekend, I noticed that it bounced back way faster than I expected. And this just reinforces the point that, Frank and I have talked about quite a bit on the side, is just the simple fact that the sun is an incredibly complex system, and we still don't understand all the mechanisms that are in play on this, gravitationally controlled, fusion reactor that gives us UV rays and, propagation and X-rays and all sorts of other great emissions as it's doing its thing.
Yeah, it certainly does, Bill. Certainly does. And I think it's great. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I've not particularly been on HF recently, but will be in a few weeks' time at SSB Field Day, the one contest of the year that the Sutton and Chain Club enter. So we always do a bit of a check in previous years just to see how many contacts that we make. Obviously, that's a combination of how much effort we put in and how conditions are, and obviously how many other stations on the air. But we're interested to see just what a difference it is this year to perhaps previous. See if we can make a few more points to be able to get out better. But unfortunately, I've not had a lot of time to do much in the way of HF radio recently. But certainly looking at this article and looking at some of the charts and things, it's certainly looking like it's a bumper cycle this time, as predicted by the doctor. And I'm going to get his name wrong, so I'm just going to say the doctor. But
McIntosh.
Thank you. Certainly looking at the graph that's been produced by, is it Silso, the people that do the graphs, and it seems to be looking extremely positive in terms of sunspot numbers. So maybe I should get on the air, as one of our other colleagues on the podcast often says.
Yeah, well, I can't give you a definitive, but a couple of years ago I was operating HF on the Grey Line time, the graveyard shift between 4 a.m. and about 7.
Always our favourite shift, isn't it, Martin?
Yeah, it's my favourite shift because I can sit there and operate. There isn't too many people on. And I heard a couple of Australians then, and they were very, very weak, and I would have never been able to work them with 100 watts. Now, okay, I didn't work them because they were just packing up and going off and said that was it for finals. The other, about just over a week ago, I had 40 meters on in the car just after 7 o'clock in the morning in the UK with a 40 meter mobile whip. Now, completely much, much worse station than I would have had 2 years before. And I was hearing these guys as clear as you can hear me on this podcast. So I think the sunspot cycles are brilliant at the moment. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Oh, I've been listening, John. The thing is, we've got two things. One, we've got sort of the model of what we think's occurring, and I use the word think. Then we got sort of reality, flares, and you've got and then you've got sort of certain indicators that are smoothed. The real way is just to get on the air and see what's occurring. I mean, I used to use the Beacon network. That used to give me a good indication. And the grey line indicator, what you were talking about earlier, I actually came across one of those. One of our guys passed away, and I was given this envelope. And the slide you slide each month across to show you where the grey lines are. I think it was done by the ARRL. And I thought, wow, I haven't seen one of these for ages. But I think the only way is, yes, these things are happening. Yes, it's going to be a maximum, which means conditions are great. But other things can occur. You get flares and all sorts of things. It's not a consistent mass, if you like, nowhere near it. So really the only way is to get on the air and see what's happening.
Yeah, certainly is, mate. Certainly is. Martin, I know for antenna problems you've not done a lot of HF recently, but what do you think?
Well, you were talking about, talking to, or here in Australia, I was talking to a New Zealander the other day. Admittedly, he's only 10 miles down the road and it was VHF. I've read this, like, how do we get to 25? Is that just when they started counting? I don't know. I'm very excited about this. I want to get back on the air, but I miss not having. I do have an antenna up. I just need to sort out an earth and get stuff built in here. It's a long story why I'm not properly on HF. But I do remember the first time I got onto HF, it was the height of a sunspot, and I had no idea what a sunspot was. I had no idea what was going on, but it was magic. Having that chat with someone in another country as if they were down the road was brilliant. This story says things are picking up on 6 meters. There's an incentive to sort my 6 meter antenna out. I actually tuned around on 4 meters FM the other day and was very excited because I heard a foreign station. I didn't recognize the call sign, so I couldn't work out where he was coming from. But he was coming in on 4 meters FM on the calling channel. But of course, everybody's calling him back, and then all you hear is all the locals just keying over each other trying to call him. In fact, that's the first time I've ever heard anybody out of the area on 4. So clearly that the things are picking up there. In fact, I'm very excited that I got my transverter back, but I'll talk about that later. But whatever bands are picking up, wherever you're hearing stuff, there is a lot of fun to be had. There have been some times and you switch the radio on and you think, oh, HF is dead. Who turned off HF? You only have to go through the Facebook groups and things like that to read comments like that. But we'll get some of that HF propagation spray that they sell on April the 1st. There's fun to be had, and I've written it in my notes here that Chris already said it. To quote our good friend Dan, get on the air.
Yeah, that's certainly it. You can sit there all day listening, but if you don't put a call out, the band might be as lively as anything, and there'll be loads of people waiting to hear somebody else. So you're dead right. Get on the band.
I saw it on someone's YouTube channel, and he was talking about it. He said, look, you can listen on 10 meters, and 10 meters can be absolutely dead. You'll never hear anything, but the band could be wide open. He said, what I do, he said, you listen on like the CB calling channel, on like one of the free calling channels. We won't go there, but we all know where it is.
Yeah.
If you listen on there, that when that wakes up, go put a call out on 10. He said, I'll guarantee you'll get so many people coming back to you, and then suddenly, just because everybody calls out on that one frequency on CB.
And I've got one, you don't need higher power.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So
just when you hear the CB wake up, put your 10 meter radio on. 10 meters is open. The chances are 12 meters is also open.
Yeah, should be. So that's a good one. So we're pleased that HF propagation is absolutely brilliant, and it's great that we kind of on this podcast knew that it was going to be a good one based on Frank and Scott McIntosh's predictions about 18 months ago, I think it was now. So,
Martin, can I add one postscript? Because
can.
I think the other presenters have talked about some really good elements to this. Let me throw one more in. If you look at the plots of back to Wolf put out his catalog with the kind of corrected numbers, you get at the peak period of solar cycles where it's the best it's going to be during that particular cycle. And you compare the smooth with the dailies. When things are good, it's also extremely volatile. So you can say, oh, there's been huge sunspots for like the past 4 days. You go out, there's no flare, there's no nothing, there's no moderation, but you go, well, gosh, I was expecting a lot more. But then when you look at what the daily sunspot number is, it's 100 to 150 less than it has been the previous few days. Now, when the sunspots are low, you don't have that volatility. So I think the listeners kind of keep that in mind. You have to really look at the daily, but then we don't know what the lag time is between a high daily and when it really improves terrestrial propagation. And that's some of the science to be worked out. I will add this. Scott McIntosh has left the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and he's now vice president at a private company called Linker Space. And he is in charge of developing the space propagation products that they do and sell. So Scott has moved out of a funded research center into a commercial sector. And anybody who's in the satellite business will probably come to Linker to know, because it will make a huge difference what the sunspot cycle and the solar flux index will be for what they're going to put in space. So I'll kind of end it with that. It's been a great discussion.
Yeah, it certainly has. And that's one of the beauties of our hobby. We're never going to know it all. Sometimes things happen when we don't think they should. But hey, it's not boring. It's just interesting, which is a good one. So great guys on that one. Right. I like this one as well. A New York high school helps licensed amateur radio operators. Now, I think this was a good one. I know it was a US story, but I'm going to give it to Leslie first. Leslie, you were quite excited about this. What do you think?
I think it's great. Let me just look at the story again, Martin. I think the number I saw was 49 students. 49 students all passed their exams. That's an actually great number. It really is. I mean, as a local club, if you get a couple of people go through it for every year, we're pleased with that. But 49, well, good on you. The other thing I've sort of noticed is that when you're doing schools, I haven't got numbers for this, so this is just a sort of feely thing, that I think it's better that when you've got a teacher or a champion inside the school promoting things and pushing a particular project over the long term, that seems to be better, rather than outside people trying to come into school for a day and give a demonstration. I think somebody that's inside the school, consistently pushing the message, pushing the hobby, and getting new people into it. And obviously the students will benefit from their studies in science and radio technology, and that will help them when it comes to their exams. I think this is a cracking story, and well done.
Yeah, I think you're right that you've got to have somebody in the school as a champion. I think as well, if you are passionate about a subject and your passion shines through, and that if you're passionate, other people want to listen to you about what you're saying, and a certain number will have a look at it. So not such a bad one. Chris, what do you think?
I think this is a great story, and this links in actually quite nicely with a story we've reported on previously, which is the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology. So one of the teachers at this New York high school, Staten Island Technical High School, a chap called Everton Henriques, call sign KD2ZZT, or as the Americans would say, ZZT. He'd actually attended that particular training program, both the TI1 and TI2. So that's the Teachers Institute 1 and Teachers Institute programs that the ARRL run every year. In fact, more than once a year, I think. I think it's a 4-day training course that they actually run multiple times throughout the year at Newington. So this is a great example of where he's then gone back to his school and got some additional help from, in this case, a chap called Steve Goodgame, who's the ARRL Education and Learning Manager. Together, they've run. It's actually been a couple of times. I think they've run this course and built the training course, and overall helped over 100 kids pass their license. And it says that some of them got an upgrade from general to extra, and there were actually a couple that went from unlicensed to extra in one go. So, yeah, all good and great that they're sort of passing on that knowledge that they've learned and getting some more people on the air. So, yeah, excellent. Really, really good.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. And mine, you and I often talk about these sort of things and say, God, wouldn't it have been great if we did this at school, or our teacher did this at school? But what do you think, mate?
Yes, it would have been great. We talked about, the kind of technology that you and I experienced. Obviously, you were on like Slate and Chisel, and, we were on the BBC Micros. But I did actually have one science teacher. He was a physics teacher, and it wasn't anything he taught, but he would occasionally reference his 2-meter radio and his horizontal loop he put on the roof of his car for car-to-car comms, which I thought was interesting. But so yeah, it would be great if we'd have been taught that. But this is getting, it's another generation getting into the hobby. There's 49 people here that have got their licenses. Some of them have gone straight up to extra, which is like their equivalent of advanced. It looks like they've got a good curriculum there of stuff they're actually showing people as well, demonstrating HF repeaters, fox hunting, and as well as space comms, and talking about mesh networks in the future. It references here. When I did my foundation, which was 2008, I think it said you have to have an HF contact, which was FM 10 meters down the road. We didn't do anything. We didn't really touch repeaters. We sort of knew what they were, but didn't really know how to do anything with them. We just had a 2-meter contact as well. But like things like fox hunting and space comms, no, didn't go down that line at all. And mesh networks is obviously a new thing, but it's really nice to see them keeping up with the new stuff, as well as demonstrating, I guess, the bread and butter type side, for want of a better phrase, of amateur radio. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, well done indeed. Now, Frank, I'm moving back to your side of the pond where this all happened. Us over in the UK think it was a great thing. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's a great thing. And I think Steve Goodgame, who was actually from Mississippi as a middle school teacher just south of Memphis, but in North Mississippi, was hired some 3 years ago. And he's doing a very good job in several ways. One is that he's getting outside of the ham radio community and going to education conferences where there are teachers. So he's going not where we are, but where they are. And we've talked about that distinction, going where they are versus having them come to us. And this is the second point, is this is what is called a train the trainer approach, where the institute that's held in Newington at HQ brings in a teacher or many teachers, but in this case, and I don't speak Spanish, but this might be Everton Enrique, KD2ZZT, but I get the ZZ Top reference, Chris. So I'm sure he was sharp dressed when he appeared at the Teachers Institute. So you've got this person who's been in intensive training at ARRL HQ, and then they go back home and they're beginning to do this. Well, where is home? This is a technical high school. And for our readers, I don't know in the UK how the schools are organized, but here in the States, if a school has technical school in the name, it means that they're oriented toward practical education, electricians, plumbers, carpentry, things of that nature, and computers. And so this is a school that has a real focus on technology. So you're going into a student population at the Staten Island Technical School that's already decided that they're interested in technology. The last thing I'll mention that I think is very, very good is it's not just get on the radio, get on the air. Hey, we certainly salute that. But he's teaching them how to make things using 3D printers, PVC, aluminum rods. How do you fabricate things to make some of the parts? Quite frankly, I'm enamored with that approach to amateur radio, as opposed to the very narrow study for the test, get your license, get a mic, or if you learn CW or digital, and all that's great. But learning how to make things, I think, generates a lot more excitement. The one thing about this program where you got teachers, you see various numbers. In the U.S., it may approach 20% of all teachers change jobs every year. So if you get Mr. Enrique there and the principal or another school district says, that's a sharp cookie, we want to hire him to come to our school or become an assistant principal, then they're no longer doing what they did. And that's about the only weakness I could see. Maybe it won't happen here, Martin.
Well, let's hope it doesn't, Frank, for the children's sake. But, good people move up within an organisation. And I always think one of the things we should always do is train our siblings to be able to do our job so that releases us to be able to take the next job up the ladder. I think lots of people don't do it that way. But maybe I'm just silly, and hopefully not. Bill, have we left you something to say on this one?
Not a whole lot. I think this is covered real good. I do want to say congratulations to everyone that passed their exams. That's really good. And the only comment I have is that one of the things from the last time we talked about the Teachers Institute on wireless technology was I didn't see much in success stories at that time, but this is the first one that they've published recently. So, because now I'm actually paying attention to look for these. So I hope we keep seeing more stories along this line here over the next few months of other schools where folks went and took the class at the ARRL's Teachers Institute, and then see what success they've had, because this is very exciting, actually.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. It's nice to get some feedback. So I think we're all agreed on that. That was another good news story. Moving over to the UK, Ofcom, our regulator, has released a new video on amateur radio license revalidation. So we've just had a massive change to amateur radio licenses in the UK. And at some point in time, we all need to revalidate our licenses to the new ones. And Ofcom have released a video on this. So, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, why not? It's it sometimes isn't obvious how these things work. We know we have how can I put this? Some of the most senior members of society are amateur radio operators. It may be that the use of IT isn't one of their kind of primary skills. So doing a little video on YouTube just to show you how to do this, why not? Why not make it easy for people? Ofcom are pretty good. I've got a little story at the end when we're talking about what we've been up to at Ofcom. And why not? Why not just make it easy for people to do this? So no, I think this is a good idea, and well done for doing it.
Yeah, I think, as I say, it's a new way of doing it. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
I have watched the video. The only thing I would say against it is that they could have titled it better on YouTube. The title is "Learn how to revalidate and update your ham radio license with the licensing portal." And I get what they're trying to do, but some keywords, revalidate, Ofcom license, something like that would have probably been a bit easier to find. But other than that, the video is great. It is lovely to see Ofcom keeping up with the times, because Chris says there are people that won't necessarily get it. YouTube is a place that people do go to find stuff out for tutorials and things like that. Okay. You know what I think of their broadcast division. They have a lot to answer for, but the comms and the PMSE side of Ofcom, absolutely awesome. It is quite a simple process. It is pretty much as simple as log into the website, click revalidate, and that's pretty much done. I actually went to do it today when I saw this news story, and unfortunately, my internet provider, my domain provider, Ionos, cancelled my contract because their prices were going really, really high, and they cancelled all my domains and didn't let me take the domains. So like my email address and stuff stopped working, and I couldn't reset the password. So I phoned up Ofcom today and I said, here's what I'm trying to do. And they were so helpful. They answered like within 3 or 4, you press 1 for amateur, 2 for ships, whatever. As soon as you go through to them, they were really helpful, went through everything on the phone with me. He's got me access to my account again, and he said, I've done your license for you. Don't worry about it. By the way, your business radio license, that expires in this date, so just be aware of that. And I've also say respect to them as well, because not only do they have a non-geographic telephone number, like an 0330 number, but they also publish their 0207 number, which is their normal, a geographic number in the UK. So again, respect for them for that. They're keeping up with the times, and good on them.
Yeah, I thought you'd be impressed. on that one. Leslie, obviously, you've got to go through this the same as I have. What do you think?
Well, many years ago, they changed the system to what they've got now, but I didn't get it initially because it was a new system. However, I do remember ringing them up and revalidating, and I've done it a couple of times since, and I've always found the Ofcom staff to be very, very helpful and very efficient. No complaints at all from me, and it was a case of, yes sir, that's done. Really? So thumbs up from me for Ofcom. Cheers.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, I'm going to move the other side of the pond, and I'm going to go to Bill first. I mean, I know this is a UK story, but producing a video to take you through it, it's got to be moving with the times, hasn't it?
Yes, and any kind of these little videos like this that organizations put out to try to help folks on how you navigate their various systems, I think that's always really good. So good on them for putting this information out so that folks can see what they're going to have to do and maybe hopefully help themselves.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Frank, have I left you anything to say on this one? I know it's a UK story, though.
Well, but it's good from kind of an outsider's perspective to just see how regulators, compare. And, there's some good parts of the FCC I've had interactions with have nothing to do with amateur radio. I'm not sure how I'd go about talking to a human being at the FCC about an amateur radio topic on the ULS, the database side, and some other things, yes. So then imagine them doing a how-to video. Wow, I'm just very impressed with that. It'd be great to see the FCC here in the States do something like that. On the other hand, the Census Bureau that collects buku data, they've gone whole hog into this and have an external advisory board. I was nominated to be on the Census Advisory Board for 2030, but because of my prostate cancer surgery and I didn't know kind of what was going to happen, I withdrew my nomination for that. But just to give you a comparison, FCC, Census Bureau does this and many, many times more to educate their users and customers. I wish the FCC had the staff to do a little more of this. I think they would be known better and loved more, if that's not too strong of a word. So good on Ofcom. Bravo from across the pond.
Yeah. Well, I think worldwide, various people, and it depends on the person in the department that's doing these things. I think this is a new way of showing how to do things, and a lot of people want to do things electronically these days rather than just phone up or send a paper form in. So the video of how to do it is a good thing, in my opinion. Moving to our next news story, new shortwave transmitter for New Zealand. I mean, really? I thought shortwaves were being stopped, but doesn't sound like it. Frank, do you want to go first on this one?
I do. Let me make a general comment, sort of as a social scientist. We tend to, in an era of extremely rich information, probably overload of information, we tend to want to make everything binary. It's all in, everybody's streaming, nobody's transmitting, or vice versa. But we want to do that. We don't really have the mental space anymore because of everything we have to deal with to think about a very nuanced thing. And I'll use the 25-cent professor word. It depends on the spatial propinquity. Boy, what does that mean? Is it how close the population is to a service provider? In this case, Radio New Zealand's, going to add shortwave, and 100,000 watt transmitter. Martin, you can tell us about what those guys look like, since you actually work for a company that made transmitters here not too long ago. So you got the customers they want to serve in a lot of islands, a big space with not much population density, such as in the urban areas. And there's shortwave. That might be AM broadcast in another situation. So it makes a lot of rational sense to do what they're doing. I'm certainly glad to see it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Frank. And it's nice to know that, 99% shortwave stations are stopping. But if there's a real good reason to have one, and New Zealand believe there is, then that's good. I wonder if their antennas are going to be NVIS, because that'll give you 600-700 miles radius. I wonder. Bill, what's your thoughts on it?
I don't really have much to add other than it's nice that they got that taken care of. And yeah, if it's 100 kilowatts NVIS, yeah, that's a pretty formidable signal. But they did say that they're looking at the Pacific region, so maybe they don't want to actually, get real close. They want to get the whole area with all the little islands around and other countries around. Not really sure, but either way, I mean, it's an investment, and they're getting there.
Oh yeah. So it's interesting in my book. Mine, you work in broadcast. What's your thoughts?
100 kilowatt transmitter is some serious power. I think we've only ever known one amateur to run anywhere near that kind of power. I'm kidding, of course. Right, they also mentioned that this may be running DRM digital stream on, I believe, on this. I don't know if anyone's actually ever heard of DRM. They talked about that on 26 meg in London a while back, but that was 2006. I don't think anything ever came of it. But clearly New Zealand see benefit in investing the money in a transmitter of this size. Obviously, the antennas and stuff, maintaining the antennas to broadcast it. 100 kilowatts, though, you think of in today's electricity prices, and I would imagine they're equally high in New Zealand as they are in the UK. I'd love to see the kind of audience figures that they get listening to this shortwave service to justify the cost of 100 kilowatts broadcast power, unless there is some legal thing that their license says if you want to stay on there, you have to. I don't know, but yeah, I'd love to see the audience figures of this versus FM, digital, whatever else they broadcast on, even like your smart speakers and things like that. But yeah, clearly it's worth their while, and it's nice to see there is life in the old bands. Yeah, I do enjoy having a listen round on my SDR Play, listening to some of the shortwave stations, and I'll be honest with you, most of them are, I think, Chinese, or they come from the Far East. And occasionally you hear sort of pirates and things on them, but most of the time they come from the Far East. So yeah, be interesting to see where they go with this.
Martin, let me just add this. I happen to be looking at a picture online of their antenna system, and there are 4 towers, 2 in the distance. So I'm assuming that they're for another antenna. But it looks like they have a curtain, and the old Sturba curtain was used back in the day. But can't tell if it's NVIS or not. But it's a horse of an antenna system for sure.
Clearly worth it to them.
I'll look the picture up in a minute. But yeah, it sounds fun. Now, Leslie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it really did surprise me, Martin. But listening to the comments Frank made, I'm not surprised now. It is an investment, and when you're looking at the density of the population, how else are you supposed to do it? We take an awful lot for granted, and it's at our fingertips. And how do you get the signal out and the information out to people? So it is a big investment. Will be considerable running costs. There's no doubt about that. But I certainly hope for them it works.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, if you've got your population spread over a large area, and, you'd have to put in hundreds, if not thousands, of little FM stations, which would cost equally as much to do. So,
Martin, let me add. Let me add on that. Remember our story about the National Survey of Canada and a surprising figure of some 23% of hams listening to shortwave. But you think about Canada, most of the population is down near the U.S. border, and you've got a similar, smaller situation in Canada where shortwave listening, at least among hams, is much higher than we would have guessed.
Certainly. So that's a good one. Chris, we probably haven't left you much to say on this one, but hopefully something.
Well, a little bit. So it's interesting. I'm interested to see what the business case was to get the funding. It was, I think you did say what the amount of money was, and I've already lost the page now. But it was a significant, I think it was $4.4 million, or part of an investment of $4.4 million. I don't think the whole of that was for the new transmitter. But they obviously do value the use of shortwave radio. This article does talk about, it says shortwave is the most certain system there is to make sure that in a crisis, tsunami or cyclone, we can get through. So maybe that's part of this justification, is the fact that perhaps in that part of the world, those sorts of incidents can happen, and it's an input. We know that internet and mobile phone signal, cell towers, etc., will fail perhaps in those sort of scenarios. So I personally think it's really good. Be a heck of an electric bill, 100 kilowatts. We were doing a recent exercise. We were looking at some repeaters in our area and what it costs to run per year, and that was like 25 watts. So running 100 kilowatts, that's going to have some electric bill over a year. But it also reminds me of our trip when we went to Dayton in 2019, and we went to visit the WLW transmission station and all the old kit that was there, and the fact it's now just one box. But some of the size of the kit and some of the size of the components in that station were phenomenal. Some of the valves or tubes, and there were huge transformers and this sort of thing. And I imagine
remember the big switch that said "Do not touch."
I didn't touch it, Frank.
But it kind of reminded you that, hey, don't pull the power.
I was extremely tempted, but I managed to control myself. Yes, so yeah, it's great. And that was a great trip as well, actually, seeing that sort of equipment in use and the huge tower there. But no, it's good that shortwave is alive and kicking in that part of the world.
Yeah, it certainly is. And on that switch, I don't know for definite, but I've met a few broadcast engineers, and they have a wicked sense of humour. The switch was probably a dead one that they just wanted to see if you pushed it. For fun. I remember having a tour of WLR in Waterford County in Highland, in Waterford, and Pat, the senior engineer there, was showing us all the bits and pieces, and he was saying to Colin, taking us down the rack of all their stuff, and he said to Colin, "Oh, this is it, this is this, and this is that." And yeah, it was interesting. He said, "And this is how I can switch the transmitter if I get fed up with it all." And he pushed the button, and Colin's mouth dropped open in almost panic. What it is just a blank panel with a switch on it, but it was done to wind people up on tours. So, yeah, I've met a couple of broadcast engineers that are like that. But hey, that switch in Cincinnati might have been a fake. Never mind. It was all good fun at the time. Move to our last news story. Frank, you sent me this one, but I'm going to get Martin to go first on this one because it kind of fits with us that Arctic Circle broadcasts are due to debut on Longwave. And I know the States doesn't tend to have Longwave transmissions, but the other thing I looked at, Martin, 252 kilohertz. Wasn't there a pirate ship on 252 kilohertz at one point in time?
It wasn't a pirate ship, because the pirate ships would have been all on medium wave, like Caroline and things like that. I think 252 and Longwave would be probably a little bit too much for a boat. 252 was, for many years, from 1989 until 2001, the home of Atlantic 252. And they often used, I can't say without editing it's what they used to call it on air, but it was 500,000 watts they used to do. They had valves in the transmitters that cost 30 grand each, and I think they said it used about £1,000 worth of electricity every single day. That was back in the 90s, and if anybody's interested, just go on YouTube and do Atlantic 252 transmitter site tour. And the engineer there, Tom Hand, will take people around and he shows you and explains the power going into the transmitters and stuff like that. So it's impressive stuff. And then he shows you the mast, and he shows you like standing at the bottom of the mast, and you can hear like the perimeter fence and things vibrating, and you can hear the output power. It's exciting. We were all, there's a whole Facebook group dedicated, because I listened to 252 back in the day. And there's a whole Facebook group, dedicated to it. And like there was always hope that Atlantic would come back. And I think it was owned by RTE and Radio Luxembourg, I think. And then RTE knocked the mast down, and they're like, oh, well, that's not going to happen anymore, is it? But the fact that something might come out of 252, I think there's an Algerian station on 252, is exciting, but I wonder what the benefit of this. I say this nicely because I'd love to hear more things on Longwave. What is the benefit? Who has Longwave radio capability nowadays? Okay, aside from radio amateurs, people that have got SDR plays and things like that, for the general public, who has Longwave capability to the extent they're going to justify? I've put it on the air now. I doubt for any minute they're going to put 500 kilowatts on air. No one's going to do that today. How much power are they going to put out? Maybe they're talking a couple of hundred watts. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But in the days of PLT being included in all sorts of stuff, electric cars putting out all sorts of things, Chinese electronics, other electronics that are not type approved, that are just squirting out all this stuff. What is the point? I mean, we're already too far gone down the road of the noise floor going up to be able to prevent people buying non-type approved stuff and to prevent the stuff coming into the country. I don't know. Who's paying for this? They've clearly got to have a business case to build this. Their website looks lovely. arcticradio.net. There's lots of pictures. There's lots of stuff there. I can't see any pictures on here. There's history of Longwave, but there's no pictures of here on their own transmitter or anything like that that I can see. But I'd love to know more, and I shall certainly be trying to have a listen anyway.
Well, that's good if you're trying to have a listen, and I'll try and have a listen. And yeah, I still own a Longwave receiver, because I've still got a few old radios that are kicking around that I haven't got rid of. I know most people have got rid of their older radios in favour of the new digital ones, and I'm not going to set you off on that. Frank, you sent the story to me originally. This is Longwave, and I know the States don't tend to use Longwave, but they're talking about signals may get across to most parts of North America. So what's your thought?
Well, I think the SWLs among us and the utility DXers will be delighted, something new to try to catch. And Bill may help me out here, and I may have this wrong, but I think we had some non-directional beacons that may have been below the broadcast band, but it's been a while. Of course, we have amateur radio frequencies here in the States that are below the broadcast band that would be considered long wave. So I do occasionally get down there primarily to see if there's any amateurs working. I sent the story along because that's the connection to amateur radio to some extent. And it's just good to see another broadcast station for a particular country come on that is not shortwave, but longwave. And it's been good to see what they will be doing with it and how successful they will be as opposed to relying on streaming. Now, I don't know, never been to Finland. I know just a vague amount about it in terms of the population density. But again, we'll see where it goes. And it's a real interesting development.
Yeah, certainly is on that one. I agree with you on that. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, actually, I have been to Finland a couple of times. It's a very cold place, so it can be certainly in winter. And I know in winter they have some very long. In the winter they have some very long nights. In the summer they have some very long days, especially in the north of Finland. Although I wasn't in that particular area, so obviously they're doing this in the very northern part of Finland, and trying to serve some unusual parts of the world. Talks about the Arctic. I don't know how many people actually are in the Arctic region. If I'm honest, I'm not really sure why they're doing this. I'm not sure why they've chosen to use longwave, particularly, as you were saying. There may not be that much equipment these days that can actually pick up longwave. So I'm a little bit confused as to what the purpose is. Not an awful lot of information. If you go onto the website for this this broadcaster, there's not an awful lot there. It just talks about this being a kind of a nostalgia thing. So it talks about they're going to be transmitting in various different languages. We're running a kilowatt and upgrade the power over time. But yeah, I'm not really sure why, if I'm honest. So perhaps someone can enlighten me.
Yeah, well, hopefully that'll be interesting to see what happens. Bill, as I said before, what's your thoughts on longwave into the States?
Yeah, I'm unaware of it. Not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just completely unaware of it. Frank mentioned the non-directional beacons. The funny story, funny as in interesting, there's a concrete arrow on a farm 30 minutes from here. And there's a website out there that like catalogs all these. They were arrows put in in the very beginning days of aviation to show folks how to fly to the next airport. So that's not radio related, but it's probably just the technology for the non-directional beacons is probably one step over the concrete arrows in the ground.
Isn't it funny that to give you directions, they call them non-directional?
Yeah, well, I guess they picked up a couple of them and triangulated their location.
Yeah. Just the name.
Anyway, I remember reading about them a long time ago. But this was an interesting story in general because I didn't even know that anybody would be even thinking about putting up a new, long wave system like this. It's kind of cool. They're going to start transmitting on October 1st, and then October 3rd, they're going to go weekends only. So that's kind of cool. But I agree with Chris on this one completely. I'm not really sure what the point is, other than maybe the point might be they can. I don't know. It's very interesting.
Well, I think, going forward, it's an interesting concept. Let's see what happens. If it works, it works, and it'll be great. If it doesn't, us public haven't lost anything, but it would be nice to see some activity on Longwave, which is a good one.
Well, and the best of luck with it.
Yeah, and the best of luck from all of us on that one.
Martin, just a quick addition. I've been doing some search while people have been chatting. Apparently there is a Arctic 252 YouTube station progress update on YouTube. So if anyone's interested, it's actually on YouTube now.
Okay, that's a good one, Leslie. Okay, that concludes our news stories for today. And I think you had a few interesting ones. Not a lot happening in amateur radio, but let's hope as we come out of the holiday season, interesting things will start to happen again in amateur radio. Right, Bill, you're on a hard stop, so I'm going to let you go first on this one. What have you been up to since we last spoke?
Mainly chasing Jarvis Island. Longtime listener to the podcast, Stan and Marion, got new vanity calls. Stan's W1BOY and Marion is W1GRL. And I actually got to work Marion when she got her new call sign on 30 meters FT8. That was the 17th of August. That was last week. So that was pretty exciting because I actually haven't worked Marion before. So she's doing the log. Way to go, Marion. And then aside from dodging thunderstorms the last couple weeks, I spent 12 days hunting down N5J on Jarvis Island, and I was able to pick them up on 12 meters and 15 meters. The interesting thing about this DXpedition is I wrote an article for Dan's blog back in 2000 where I was daydreaming, envisioning the DXpedition rover, like a Mars style rover, except it's ready to go for a DXpedition. This is like a major leap forward with this DXpedition in realizing that daydream I had the one day. They got limited use permits to get on the island because it's a natural wildlife reservation. So they put their equipment on a boat that had wheels on it, got to the island, pulled up, took the radios in the boxes. Some of them they left on the boat, looks like. Some of them they put nearby. Put up the antennas, set up the generators, and then the humans went back to the boat and operated remotely. And they had internet connectivity to the boat. So they had a continuous stream of fresh operators, the whole operation, 24 hours a day. So not only did they not get the end of the DXpedition fatigue from everybody being out in the heat, if for a tropical island DXpedition, it's brutal heat, or all the logistics that they had to do about getting, the stuff to keep the people going, like food and water and tents and all that stuff off the boat and to the island. They kept all that on the boat. They were able to work remotely to the stations, and I'm willing to predict that they put up some big numbers here. They just went QRT, I think, yesterday afternoon. So we'll see how many QSOs they log, but it feels like a big one. They're also the first DXpedition to use the Super Fox mode in FT8, which is a constant envelope on the DXpedition side. So instead of having discrete FT8 signals as they're working multiple stations, they send a wider signal with higher power, higher signal clarity, and it looks like they have a digital signature on it, so that you can prove it was them. And that's a pretty neat little technology. Likewise, I also, just one last thing here, I also worked a little place called Market Reef, and they were booming. That was Monday night, I think. So a lot of radio, but mainly around chasing the DXpeditions this month.
Well, that's great. And you introduced me to Marion in 2019 with her husband. Lovely people. So I'm glad you got to work her. And if she's got a new call sign, great. Congratulations, Marion. As I say, two nice people you introduced me to in Dayton, amongst many, but certainly they stood out in my mind. So good one, Bill. Frank, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke on the podcast, I'm going to say, because you and I have had a few conversations along the way?
Well, I was able to travel to the Huntsville, Alabama Hamfest. I wasn't sure I was yet strong enough to drive by myself. So a couple of area hams from the Vicksburg area came through Jackson, picked me up. We had a great trip, a lot of fun discussions, and a great time was had by all that I knew about at the Huntsville Hamfest. They are reporting a record crowd attendance. Huntsville is not a Hamcation or Pacificon necessarily, although I've not been to either of those, but they are a very solid and growing regional Hamfest held in the Von Braun Conference Center. And there's an Embassy Suites hotel connected to it where I tend to stay every year. And that helps make it good because it can be hot, it can be rainy, it can be whatever, but you're sort of protected, the boneyard's inside and stuff. I picked up a couple of watt meters. I've been looking for a direct W4, which is a 5% meter, just like the famous Bird meter is in terms of accuracy. And then from a silent key estate, I bought an MFJ digital HF VHF with a little 200 watt dummy load. And I don't haggle with silent key estates. They're looking for the money, and often it's priced very well. So I had a good time. I'm now turned over the Madison County Library System Amateur Radio Training Project, which I kind of led and developed as an ARRL field staff member, over to the Jackson Amateur Radio Club. Their board's made some strides toward engaging with the administrative staff in Canton, and they will be continuing that project under their leadership. I'll focus on promoting amateur radio and public libraries in general. And on that note, while in Huntsville, I met with the World Radio League CEO James Cribbs, KN4NEH, and his staff. The World Radio League is a new commercial logging and related website. Now, you can get in for free and do a lot of stuff, post your logs. They will handle POTA and that sort of thing. But you can then pay and you get additional services, just like you can with many of the QRZ, for example, or EHAM or some others. Now, they have agreed to be the central host of the new Libraries on the Air program that I've developed along with Martin Butler, and calling that LEOTA. They're going to handle the spots, the logbook uploads, the maps and identifiers, just like you would with POTA, and the other elements like how many libraries you work and so on as we implement that during the fall of this year. Due to my prostate cancer surgery, I didn't quite get the database finished. I've got all the U.S. and Canada done and geocoded with contact information for the libraries. And I've got England. I need to double check a few there, but I'm finalizing Scotland and Ireland, and I should have that done in a few weeks, and I'll get that over to WRL and their staff, and that should be implemented this fall. They're an exciting group of young hams doing pioneering work, so I encourage everyone who's listening, check out the World Radio League. Google is your friend there, and just take a look at what they got, see whether or not that's worth it for you. But if you want to bring amateur radio to libraries beginning in the fall, negotiate with your local area library to be able to set up your station there portably, show it to their patrons, and activate a library, getting them on the air. Another thing is I'm still experimenting with vertical antennas based on the 17-foot whips and some 8-foot whips, as I've mentioned in previous podcast episode. This past week, I had a deal on eBay where I got a half a dozen 8-foot whips, brand new, open box, for $20. Incredible for stainless steel whips, even though they're only 8 feet. What's the magic number for 8 feet? 10 meters. So I created a 10-meter version of a vertical with elevated radials, and I mounted that on an 8-foot camera-like tripod. So 8-foot tripod, 8-foot whips, that's the quarter wave magic number. And I tested it yesterday. It resonated on 28.3 megahertz down to a 1.3 SWR without any tweaking. I may do a little tweaking there, but getting the feed point a quarter wavelength above the ground with 2 elevated radials angled down at 45 degrees, which some of the research shows, that's the sweet spot with 2 radials. It ought to be a more efficient antenna on 10 meters. I'll put it on the air soon if we get a break from this 100-degree heat we've had. And finally, like a lot of other people, I've been experimenting with ChatGPT. My main interest at this point is not just asking it questions and getting it to do stuff for me per se, but their optical character recognition tools. For a year or two now, I've wanted to create an historical database of hams in the U.S. You know, the FCC lost all the records due to a fire at some point prior to, 2000 or somewhere in there. So using the PDFs of call books from 1910 to 1990 for each decade that's on the Internet Archive, I've been experimenting with using ChatGPT to use artificial intelligence to look at the tables in those PDFs, to OCR them, to see how clear they will do that, and then extract those out into a machine-readable format, such as a table format. And I've done some initial results with the free version of ChatGPT where you can do less than 10 pages from the 1920 call book. And I must say, I went from A all the way through all the Bs, and the results were almost perfect. I can't believe they're going to be that good throughout the whole thing. It's experimental. And if I'm able to georeference the extracted records, if those results are good enough, I may pay the $20 a month version to get these different call books geocoded, because I'd like to be able to see where ham radio came from. You know, a couple of years ago, I had a feature on the original hams that Hugo Gernsback kind of put together before there was even an ARRL. And it'd be kind of interesting to see where these historical hams are located, how many of them are clustered. Did it grow as the population grew? Were they in urban, rural areas? Just what was it like for each of those decades, and what kind of change we can observe? And that'll be posted on Fox Mike Hotel, and I'll probably draft a couple of articles out of it. But Martin, I'm getting a little bit of my strength back and getting back to work.
I know you are, Frank, because I've been hassling you a lot, and recently, the last few days, you and I have been so busy, we haven't actually stopped for a chat. One thing I'm going to add to your libraries, you mentioned England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. You forgot to mention Wales, but I know you're doing well.
I already got Wales. Yeah, got Wales. Those are what I lack. I need to do those. That's what I don't have done.
Okay, because I don't want the Welsh listeners thinking they've been left out, because I know you
listen. I've learned a lot of Welsh in the meantime.
Yeah, well, hopefully it's good Welsh. That's all I'm going to say, Frank.
I used to listen to Tom Jones, my friend. I'm aware of the Welsh.
All right, no problems, no problem. Okay, Leslie, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Oh, I've not been up to very much at all, Martin, but will be this coming weekend. What I've been doing is sorting out the kit, because we've got our annual field weekend this coming weekend, which is, Let me just have a look. It's the 23rd to the 26th of this month. So we'll be using the Call Sign Golf X-Ray 2 Hotel Romeo as part of the Silverthorne Radio Club. And HF, I think probably a bit of VHF, definitely a HF. We're using one. We will be using one of the verticals initially, Frank. So I'll send you a picture of that. What we're using.
Right.
So like an initial setup we do, and then when we got more members in the morning, they start. We start putting the heavy stuff up. So that's what we've got planned this coming weekend, Martin.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Well, I might even work here yet, because I'll tell you in a minute, but Edmund and I are out of the weekend as well. Right, Martin, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Probably not as much. I mean, Frank just mentioned about learning Welsh. I had to learn to pronounce some Welsh place names. They stuck me live on BBC Radio Wales a while back, and I had no idea how to pronounce these things. But fortunately, their producer was very helpful and told me how to pronounce some of the places. So I have learnt a few Welsh names. I have no idea about any other names, but I didn't manage to offend anybody, and I didn't get any complaints. But there we go. So yeah, playing a bit with VHF and UHF. As I mentioned before, my shack is down at the moment. It's not assembled. Basically, I have a table in here that I want to put my equipment on, and it was sort of, my desk is not quite big enough, so I've put a table beside it. But the table is a very thin, tallish telephone table that basically we found in the hall we moved in, and it's got a board on the top, and it's got my work laptop sitting on it. It's fine for that, but anything bigger than that, I can't set up in it. So I need to sort some legs out for that, and then I can put the radios on it and think about routing cables up to antennas and things like that. The HF antenna, the cable already comes into here. I just have nowhere to put the radio yet. But with the Sunspot cycles, as they are at the moment, I'm hoping to at least get on the air to some extent. But I've been on VHF and UHF from my house. I have a number of PMR radios that have been programmed out with amateur frequencies that have just on in the workshop that I switch on, and I've had a few chats on those recently. Of course, I've been on the talk group. I had a chat with you on the talk group this morning, and a couple of other things I will mention. I'll give a shout out to a couple of people, a couple of companies here. Spectrum Communications. I had a transverter that I was using for 4 meters that I bought from them in the early days when I bought my 7600, and it was custom made for the 7600, and it failed some 12, 13 years or whatever after I bought it, and it's had a fair amount of use. Something went wrong with it, and I contacted the guy there, and he said, yeah, send it down to me, I'll have a look at it, see what's wrong with it. And he spent quite a long time actually trying to work out what was going on. I think he was quite surprised it was a single component that had failed, but he repaired that very reasonably. So he shipped that back to me. So I've got my 4 meter transverter. So very excited to get back on 4 meters SSB and an AM when the time permits. So Spectrum Communications, they were really helpful. And the other people I've had a chat with, randomly, my phone rang the other day, and I had a call from a company called Radiotronics, who are a PMR dealer. We are not associated with these companies, but the guy said, I just want to update the database because your email isn't working, that sort of stuff. He's like, what do you do with this then? Because you don't buy lots of stuff, but you do something. We just had a lovely little chat about amateur radio and things like that. He said, yeah, we do we have to do the course as part of our part working here. They made us do this, but he says, I just work here. I've never actually got on the air with it, but we understand what it is. And he was a genuinely nice guy for having a bit of a chat, just what we do. And said, are there any podcasts on this? Like, yeah. And I referred him to us. So if, so I forget his name, but if you're listening, sir, hello to you. And that was, but yeah, that was all good. And they're a company that I use to get like the programming software and stuff. If you've got a radio that you haven't got the programming software for, you check them out, and typically they can find that software for you. So yeah, but that's pretty much all I've been doing radio wise. Obviously, I have radios we use for work, and we have radio mics and stuff, but that's a whole other story.
Certainly is, mate. Certainly is. Chris, I'm sorry I left you to last again, but what have you been up to?
Happy until last. That's okay, because I got to go first at the start, didn't I? So I can't really complain. Well, a few things on here. We've done a bit of work at the Radio Club, a few things going on. We had a member that's got into a nursing home, and we had the family get in touch, and we've sold some of his kit. It was quite nice. Got some money for the family and made sure it wasn't kind of undersold, so to speak. So happy members that got some kit to play with and some money back to the family. So that was a win-win. I dug out my ERA Morse decoder. I think it also does other modes as well. And Matt Nasso, we used to be on the podcast. We need to get him back on the podcast. I don't know if he's listening or not. He wanted to have a look at that because he's back in the area, been on the club a few times recently. So I brought that up on Monday night and went to play with that, and that seems to work pretty well. He brought along his Vibroplex Morse key, and it seemed to decode that pretty well. What else has been going on? Oh, I managed to... My original scanner that I bought when I was about 18 years old, so we're going back a few years, probably to the early 1990s. No, actually, probably before that, actually. Yeah, we'll say the early 1990s, I think. I had a scanner that I bought from the well-known retailer in the UK, Tandy, who sadly went out of business a long time ago, and in the States known as Radio Shack. Tandy was the brand over here in the UK. And yeah, I had one of their scanners, and it was a handheld scanner, and the battery pack was long gone. And I managed to get the bits from AliExpress, that well-known Chinese outfit. It took quite a while to arrive, actually, for the cells, but managed to redo the battery pack. I've now got my original scanner. It's now back up and running, so that's all very good. So that's just for nostalgia reasons, really. Martin, I know you were down at the Lighthouse of Edmund. I also popped along to say hello, but I'll let you out. I'm sure no doubt you'll talk about that in your section down on the south coast. We also had a great talk by Steve Hartley, who's the GQRP club chairman for the club. He was talking about a radio called the SCD, which was a kind of a GQRP club project. And he did some work to, because this is a fairly old design now, and he did some work to replace some of the components in there with more modern equivalents. And he was telling us all about that, which was very interesting. We also had a visitor at the club who was interested in amateur radio, and he informed us that he actually took his radio amateur's exam back in the 1970s, but never actually went to get his license. And we were talking about Ofcom earlier and how helpful they can be. Well, we said, look, have a word with Ofcom, and there's a very high chance they'll give you a license. As long as you've got the paperwork, which you did have, you've already passed the exam, they'll give you a full license, I believe. So he was going to go away and speak to them. And he felt a bit of a fraud, given that he hadn't done any radio for sort of, 40, 50, well, probably more like 50 years. So obviously we'll support him and bring him up to date on how things work. We'll give him a bit of a demonstration on modern day radios, and he seemed to be quite fascinated by that. So hopefully he'll be back and hopefully have a license when we see him next time, and we can certainly bring him up to speed. And then finally, I think I mentioned it earlier, SSB Field Day, which is the contest that we as a club enter every year. It's about the one contest that we do. That's coming up on the first week of September. So sunspots are in our favour. We'll make lots of contacts and hopefully beat our previous year's records. So that's it from me, Martin. Over to you.
Yeah, you've been pretty busy as well, Chris. Well, I looked at my diary, and pretty much August, I'm busy every weekend in August. In fact, I only have one weekend in September. I've not got a weekend booked to do something. But let's not bore you with my problems. Most of them are radio, though, I must admit, my weekends. At the moment, last Saturday, I was with Edmund, and we did Lighthouses on the Air, Edmund and myself. Chris turned up during the day, so it was great to see Chris. We went down to put it on the air. I took a student with me, a lady with me, Claire, and she did manage to operate under supervision and had great fun and asked lots of questions as well. So that worked very, very well for us. We kept Edmund company and it was great fun. Did do a poter activation the week before. I went to this park and I thought, not 100% sure on the safety issue of the place on my own, but I went to the park and I just put a a mag mount with a mobile whip for 40 metres on the car, used my little Zygo G90, and when I arrived, there was nobody in the car. Within 2 hours, in the car park. Within 2 hours, the car park was heaving. They had a fun run. So I'm very lucky I didn't bother to put a big aerial up, because I'd have had a major problem getting it down with cars everywhere. In fact, they weren't even properly parked in the car park. But I got me 10 contacts, and yeah, really enjoyed myself. Only 20 watts. Furthest one was Czechoslovakia, where I worked the young ladies' special events station, and I must have caught them just as they were setting up, and they put their first call out, because the young lady I spoke to sounded a bit flustered that I went back to her as quick as I did, and I knew what she was up to. So I knew what she was up to. So we had a quick conversation, and it was all very good. Did go to the flight refueling rally a couple of weeks ago down into Dorset. That is a hell of a drive, and traffic was an absolute nightmare. Fortunately, though, because I'd left early enough, we got there not too bad a time. A few other amateurs I met came from Kent, and they reckon it took them 4.5 hours to get there, which it should have been a 2.5 hour trip. So there you go. That shows you what traffic was like. Club night talk was great with Steve, as Chris has told you. I'm doing training sessions with a student, Claire, twice a week now, so that's looking good. The Sunday the podcast goes out, the Sunday the 25th. Edmund and I will be out doing British Inland Waterways on the air from South London. We're going to be doing it via the River Thames at Runnymede, and I've booked us on into the group there. So we'll be on air on the 25th, and then also been active on the talk group, as Martin said. Worked him this morning and have worked a few others, so that's good fun. Did speak to Matthew, as Chris said. He was at the club this week. He's popped up a couple of weeks. He's back in the UK now, and he's just sorting himself out and trying to get all his life sorted and straightened. And I'm hoping he'll join us sometime in the new year, if not before, and come back on the podcast, because he didn't leave through any bad feelings. He had family issues that he needed to sort out. We support him on that. So
we miss Matthew. We miss Matthew.
Yeah, we do. And it'd be great if he comes back. The only other things happening, these are a couple of events happening. 31st of August and the 1st of September, I'm going to be in the Midlands at a place called Telford. I'm going to the GQRP Club's 50th anniversary meeting. So
excellent.
Yeah. So I'm up there for a couple of days, and that should be fun. So that'll be good. And as Chris said, the week after that, as I said, all my weekends are busy. The weekend after that is SSB Field Day, which is the 7th and 8th of September. And I'm hoping to get at least one day with you, Chris. So very, very busy, but it's mainly radio. So I've got a smile from ear to ear. So without further ado, guys, pretty much that's what we've all been up to. So all that's left for me to do is thank the guys for turning up. I'd like to thank Frank, K4FMH.
Thank you, and glad to be around you guys again.
Yeah, great to have you as always, Frank. I'd like to thank Leslie, G0CIB.
Thanks for inviting me, Martin. It's been a blast as always.
Yeah, no problems. And we'd also like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
It's been fun, thank you.
Yeah, and once again, Chris, we'll see you. We've got another meeting tomorrow night for the club, but it's always great chatting to you again, Chris. Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Yeah, great to talk to you guys once every few weeks, so another fun one.
Yeah, and Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B, unfortunately had to leave. He was on a very much a hard stop, but we thank Bill because he does manage to get recording done for us as well as his day job. So I don't quite know how he does it, but he manages to find some time in his day job. So, okay, guys, I'll say 73s and we'll continue with the rest of the podcast. 73.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. We start with news here of the Merchant Navy Day special event, which will take place on the 3rd of September. And you need to listen out for special event station Golf Bravo 0, Mike November Delta. And that'll be on the air to honour the merchant service seafarers of the world and the British Merchant Navy. So that's going to be taking place from the town of South Shields in the northeast coast of England. So listen out to that special event station. It's going to be operating on HF, operating CW single sideband and digital modes. So that's GB0 Mike November Delta. The ARRL have announced that they've expanded their publication archive for members, and as I say, it's offering a great rich access to information from ARRL periodicals that they've been publishing over the years. So they've got extensively indexed archive of QEX from 1991 to 2001 and NCJ from 1973 to 2011. So lots of information there. They're also saying as well that the archive is populated with QST articles from as far back as 1915. So say the ARRL, are opening this up to members to work through their archive and find that passionate, wonderful information that they might be looking for. UK Hamfest will be happening next month, at the end of next month, the 27th and 28th of September. And the RSGB Morse Competency test will be available. You don't have to book in pass, you just have to turn up. And you can prove your efficiency from 10 words a minute all the way up to 30 words per minute. And you don't have to be a CWS expert. You just need to show your appreciation and your competency and show you can actually pass the test and receive a cert on the day, or it can be mailed on to you electronically afterwards if you so desire. Great opportunity at UK Hamfest on the 27th and 28th of September to show your skill in Morse code. Right, well now we head over to our features episode, and I really hope you enjoy this one. It's the incredible story of Golf 2 November Mike. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now for this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Well, hi guys. Today I have a very, very interesting gentleman I'm going to talk to, David. And he's going to tell us a very, very interesting story about an amateur who was one of the original amateurs in the UK that did a tremendous amount of work for us. He actually spent quite a bit of his time in the area where I live, and I knew nothing about him until a few months ago. So quite honestly, I think you guys are thoroughly going to enjoy what David has to say. But before we get David into talking on the subject, David, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're an amateur, I believe, G4, if I remember right. And I haven't got your call sign in front of me, but tell us about yourself first.
Yeah, you're quite right, Martin. A very old ham, you might say. I first became interested in radio when I was living in Toronto, in Canada, in the 1960s. And my parents took us down to Toledo, Ohio, to visit my cousins. And my cousin Chuck had a Heathkit receiver, shortwave receiver. And I found it utterly fascinating, took home the memory, and then discovered I couldn't afford it. I was at high school in Toronto, and I was doing a 5 a.m. paper round. So I built a shortwave receiver kit, but it never actually worked. But then family moved back to England in late 60s, and I bought an old Air Ministry set, a number 52 set, for shortwave listening. Made friends with an old ham, G3RRD. He taught me quite a lot. Very helpful guy. Real enthusiast. I joined a local radio club in Gloucestershire and then went to a local college for a ham license. And first license is G8CDQ, That was in 1968. Then I bought a 2-meter transmitter kit and got that working with a microwave modules device, sending and receiving, and stayed active on 2 meters for a few years. Then finally left school after A-levels, got a job with the BBC engineering department, and worked at a transmitting station in Skelton, Cumberland. There for a couple of years, and then moved down to the Droitwich transmitter, where the first radio broadcast was made in this country. Then left in 1970-71, moved to Bromsgrove and started teacher training, and then started teaching at Droitwich High School, where I founded a radio club and still in touch with some of the former members who come up for an annual barbecue. A few years later, I was licensed as G4JSZ and very active on shortwaves, SSB, 20 meters especially. I joined the Bromsgrove and District Amateur Radio Club, then the Worcester and District Amateur Radio Club, and I was chair of that in 1988. Currently, I'm not a member of any radio club, but I do join the 5 Bravo DX group in Cyprus during March and November as a guest member. So that's basically my radio history.
Yeah. Well, that sounds very, very interesting. And in fairness, you've done quite a lot. I better not start talking to you about Cyprus, because I used to go out there a fair bit. And I know a few of the guys, and we could probably spend the rest of this time talking about that. But what we're having along here for today for is a gentleman who has had the call sign G2NM, Gerard Marcuse, I believe. Hopefully I pronounced his name correct. Phenomenally interesting gentleman, and you've written a book on him. So I wonder if you can tell us about him.
Yeah, Gerald Ergen Marcuse was born in England. His father was a German national who came over to England in the late 1860s and moved to Sutton, where you live, I believe. And he got very interested in grain import-export and started a business on the Corn Exchange, became quite an important man in grain dealing. He married, so this is Gerald's father, he married a daughter who was one of the 3 Bells of Sutton. And then they had their son, Gerald, and another son, Walter. Walter went on and wrote a book called Through Western Madagascar. And Gerald, of course, we all know he became a very famous pioneer of radio. His father sent him to Germany in 1903. And whilst he was there, he had a pretty torrid time filing pieces of metal, making weights, and doing basic work in metal engineering. And one of the comments he made when he was there was, "I definitely do not want to be an engineer." Of course, that's a bit of a joke, because he ended up a very successful one. He wasn't exactly an angel when he was there. He managed to turn the lights out in the town of Einbeck, where he was studying, and got into terrible trouble over it. He was a great socializer, loved his beer, drinking with the girls and his friends, and eventually passed out after 1 year and came back to the UK. Then he went to the engineering school somewhere in London. I think it was Crystal Palace Engineering School. And he spent 3 years there, passed out, and then joined a company in Lincolnshire called Ruston's. That involved an apprenticeship for a few years. He completed his apprenticeship, and then one of his first jobs was to take a steam pump, because he was a steam pump engineer qualified, to the Ottoman Empire, which is, of course, modern-day Turkey. So he went by ship to Alexandria, off the coast of Egypt, travelled all the way up on a horse and cart, right through modern-day Egypt, Israel, Syria, and into the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey. He was a witness to the Adana massacre of Armenian Christians, and in the book I've recorded some incredible conversations he has with his boss, in which he describes the terrible conditions and the murders that he was actually a witness to. Anyway, he completed that, and his next job was to go to Mexico. And then he found himself in the middle of the Mexican Revolution. So not a guy who sort of stayed out of trouble, but obviously it was unwittingly. He started experimenting with radio in the 1910s. He got married in 1913, and his wife went to live in Bristol. Spent many, many nights staying up very late, and of course it didn't do the marriage any good, and that ended. And then eventually he moved back to London. He was licensed as G2NM originally in 1919, and he's listed in the first call book that Britain actually had printed, along with the names of every radio officer on board ship, etc. So in the early days, it's important really to note that Gerald was a great friend and companion of Marconi, Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi was the inventor and formed the Marconi Company, and everybody has heard about him. The Marconi name, of course, still exists today. And Gerald used to test the equipment from the Marconi Company. We don't know the exact details, but I think there was a very good deal going on where Gerald was able to get the equipment free, and Marconi was given full license to actually advertise the fact that Gerald Marcuse had been using the equipment successfully. Jerry went on to start broadcasting, and that was a period known as the Empire broadcasts. He was one of the few amateurs to actually get a license from the post office to broadcast entertainment across the world. He was an activist, and at the time he was experimenting, and broadcasting. He was contributing towards the establishment of an international radio organization with rules and frequencies. And his experiments eventually led him to applying to the post office for higher power, and he was allowed to transmit up to 1 kilowatt. He had restricted times when he could transmit, and he was restricted to certain types of entertainment, no politics or religious input, all musical entertainment. He spent the sum of £6,000 on his equipment, which was a massive sum in those days. He was a chair of the Practical Wireless meeting in 1925, but his first major achievement was to make CW contact between Britain and California. Everybody knows that Marconi was the first person to transmit between Britain and the United States, from Cornwall to Newfoundland in Canada. But Gerald made that first contact with California, and it was in Los Gatos, the exact location. I've been working with the library for many years over details about that contact, and they've been very helpful. In 1924, he was appointed ARRL operations manager for the British Isles, and very successful in that venture. Then he went on in 1925, and he was the first to contact New Zealand using speech. He contacted a radio officer of an American warship. This was the United States ship, the USS Seattle, which happened to be in New Zealand waters. The captain of the ship, when he was told that his radio officer had been speaking to somebody from Britain, just didn't believe it. He thought it was a complete joke and fabricated, and they were just pulling his leg. So the captain devised a set of questions and answers that only he knew, telegraphed them to the American Embassy in London, and the next day a guy came up from the American Embassy to Jerry's house in Caterham and actually heard the signal from the USS Seattle, and the contact was established, and of course the questions were answered correctly, so the captain actually believed what was happening. He was the first person, this is Jerry, to make radio contact between Britain and South America. It was very late at night, and he was talking to a guy in Alabama and just finished the sked, about to switch off, when he heard this very faint signal. And this was actually the radio operator from the Hamilton Rice expedition in about 1925. This was sponsored by the Royal Geographical Society, the RGS, and a full account of it is in the RGS Journal in June 1926. Hamilton Rice was on his sixth expedition in his quest to locate the source of the Amazon and the whereabouts of what was observed as a very strange white Indian group of natives living in the wild. And he was also interested in researching the source of the river Amazon, the mighty Amazon River. Well, the expedition had been lost for 6 months, no contact with anyone. And you're talking about a period in history when, of course, the jungle was filled with natives who weren't very friendly. In fact, there were headhunters, cannibals, pernicious insects, snakes, goodness knows whatever else. He didn't want his head appearing on a mantelpiece, obviously. Well, they flew up part of the way to the Amazon, and unfortunately the aircraft broke down, so they had to travel up the Amazon to reach the Boa Vista region, which is a long way up, about 1,000 miles or so up. And that's where eventually this contact took place. Jerry couldn't really believe he was talking to someone from South America because no one had ever spoken to anyone from South America by radio before. But what he did was he went to the RGS in London and told them what had happened, and they said they would come up the following night and start making inquiries and find out what was going on, which they did, and were relieved to hear that all the money they'd invested in the Hamilton Rice expedition that year was not wasted. And obviously Jerry had a lot of good publicity for what he did then. Well, Jerry did marry a second time. They had a son, David, and David is still alive. David lives with his wife, Liz, near Stratford. I've been working with David for probably 12 years on and off. So I'm his father's official biographer. David was very helpful to me in all aspects of this. He remembers his father's interests because it took the family all over the country. Jerry was a man who liked country pursuits. He enjoyed shooting, sailing, and of course he built up mobile radio communications. He was able to form, with agreement with the police and ambulance services, mobile communications for them by suggesting the type of equipment and aerials. So they have Jerry to thank for setting up mobile communications. Jerry was made president of the RSGB in the late 1920s. He assisted in the formation of the Civilian Wireless Reserve in 1937, and just as the war was starting, or had started, he was visited by two guys one day in suits and told he was moving to Bosom. And they were from one of the ministries of intelligence, and they wanted him to go on to a ship on the River Solent, not the river, the Solent, monitoring German military traffic, because Jerry was fluent in German from his ancestry, obviously. And he was granted a restricted certificate in radio telephony, which allowed him to operate on board a ship. He became one of the V1s, group of listeners, all of whom were monitoring wartime military traffic. And that would have been sent to, I think, St Albans, and that would have been sorted. And then eventually it went on to Bletchley Park for decoding. So he made a substantial contribution to the war effort. In fact, in 1945, I've seen a certificate he was awarded for valued and devoted service to the Radio Security Service, that's the RSS, and he was listed as a group leader. I sent a copy of the letter he received to Bletchley Park, and fortunately they've now acknowledged him as a member of the honour roll, and he's now on that list. So later years, he was interviewed by the RSGB 4 or 5 times. An outline of all the interviews, actually a detailed outline, is included in the back of the book as an appendix, in which he goes through his early reminiscences, very, very openly describes what went on, including the fact that at some stages they didn't bother with licenses, they just got on with transmitting. But as regulations tightened up, obviously, they complied and towed the line and got their license. The post office initially had given radio hams the shortwave frequencies because they thought they were no use at all. And of course, they were the only ones that could be used. So they sort of shot themselves in their own foot because the BBC was convinced that lower frequencies were the best ones for transmitting and broadcasting overseas. And of course, nobody heard them. So that was a great thing for Jerry to be able to prove that they did work, along with a lot of other amateurs at the time. So in the first interview, in the appendix, the BBC threatened him with copyright because he was rebroadcasting the signals that nobody could hear. So he had to stop and came to an agreement with the Savoy Hotel in London, where he employed a full orchestra and recording equipment. This was sent by cable to Percy Valentine, who filtered it and sent it to Jerry for rebroadcast. So he's found his way around the BBC as well as the post office. To wind up, Jerry died in 1961, and there's a great tribute to him in Caterham on the side of the house where he lived. And there's a brass plaque which explains exactly what his achievements were, and where he's buried in Bosham. There's a sundial, and the sundial has a map on the top showing some of the places where he contacted and the dates alongside it. In the book, I've digitized every manuscript that the Amberley Museum allowed me to use. So I've got full copies of that. If there's ever a fire or anything at Amberley, Jerry's contributions will be saved in digital format.
I think what you've said here, David, you've given a very good overview of the story. I think I'm going to suggest that, you could probably be here for another couple of hours, and I don't mean that nastily.
All day, actually, Martin.
Yeah, but we don't advertise here, but David's book is well worth the read. There's a lot more in the book that David hasn't spoken about. There's all the things, and I'm not going to give too much away but in fairness, the BBC weren't best pleased with Gerard. They weren't very pleased with him. They didn't even acknowledge him half the time, and it's just his struggle. But what he actually did for us amateurs, as well as the broadcast industry, has made it kind of what it is today. And I think you guys are going to enjoy David's book. If should you wish to contact him and buy a copy, it's not expensive. And the other thing I'm going to say is, pop down if you're in the south of England. Pop into Amberley Museum. Well, I think it's sometimes referred to as Amberley Chalk Pits Museum, but it isn't called that these days, but people will know what you mean. pop in there because there is a recreation of Jerry's shack, along with fellow ICQ podcast presenter who's a volunteer there, Edmund Spicer, actually holds the call sign to G2NM. So that's how I found about it early part of the year. So I think that's fair, isn't it, David?
Yes, that's pretty good coverage. Amazon do the worldwide black and white version of the book, and I've got the colour version, the rights to the colour version.
Yeah. So I'm going to suggest that you've given enough away for free, and that's fine, because that's what we do on the podcast. But there is more in your book, and if somebody's really interested in the early days of amateur radio and all the backup documentation, because David hasn't just written and said, this is the story. The documentation is in the book that it cross-reference as well. So it's a really interesting book. As I say, David, if somebody wanted to contact you, are you happy to take contacts via email? And say if they want a book, assume it's email.
Yes, of course. I'd be very pleased to. And the email address for ordering the colour version, is Marcuse G2NM @protonmail.com.
Right. So there you go, guys. I think it's well worth a look, because I've actually bought two of the black and white books, but as I say, well worth a look. And as I say, I think we'll leave it here, David, because I don't want you to give too much away that people don't want to find out for themselves what you've actually done, which I think is really, really good. So, any last words from yourself?
No, just to thank you very much for your interest, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. I would just say, finally, it is a labour of love writing a biography. You come across all kinds of pits and difficulties, and it's taken over 10 years, but I'm sure there'll be much in there that is of interest to a lot of people. It's written in a non-technical.
Yeah, as I'll agree, it's a very easy read. You can sit back and with a chair and read it, and then towards the back half of the book, there is a lot of the more documented things that actually happen. So the story's at the front, but all the cross-referencing, which gives you some really interesting insight. And I think without David Gerard doing what he did many, many moons ago, we wouldn't have been so well off in amateur radio. I just feel it's a very shame that very few people know this gentleman's name. Everybody knows Marconi. Everybody knows Hiram Percy Maxim in the States and all those sort of people. But it just seems that Jerry hasn't had his fair crack of the whip to me. So that's why I'm asked David to come along and talk to us.
Yeah, it's all very true.
Yeah. So thank you, David, for giving me the time. And hopefully you'll get some contacts through this interview.
Many thanks.
Yes, 73.
73s.
The ICQ Podcast Digital Voice Talk Group. Your digital home away from home. Worldwide.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our fascinating feature there on the history of Gerard Marcuse, and one interesting gentleman in our hobby, which I'm sure many of you may not have heard of. So, as I say, it really was an enlightening feature there, Dad, and a great find by you, if you don't mind me saying so.
Yeah, well, I only found out about the gentleman myself earlier this year when I was out helping Edmund do Marconi Day. And it just so happens that the Edmund is actually the license holder for G2NM at the moment. And he holds that on behalf of the Amberley Museum in West Sussex. And they had a shack there, a mock-up of Gerard Marcuse's shack. And I kind of got very interested in let's try and find out more about it. bought the book. I went and looked online, found a book, read the book, and then thought, this story is just too good for me to try and do on my own, and suggested that the gentleman who wrote the book come and tell us the whole story. He's told us most of it. However, there's a hell of a lot more in his book, and referencing. So unbelievable that the guy was born in the area where I live and did so much for radio, and so few people remember him. So that's worth, I think, the feature, Colin.
Yep, definitely so. So, guys, hope everybody you enjoyed that fantastic story, and as I say, and obviously check out more, as I say, and if you wish to find out more, but certainly something to get your teeth into there. Right, well, as I say, we'd like to obviously thank our donors this episode, our monthly subscription donors, for taking their wonderful treasure and sending it our way to help us pay our way and produce your podcast for you advert free. You can support your ICQ podcast show in a very simple way. You go to icqpodcast.com/donate, where we've got now a very simplified donation section there. You just click on one of a couple of options, and you can either do a one-off donation or you can do a subscription donation to support the show. And everything that comes our way helps us pay our way and our bills, etc., and keeps us advert free. So we really would appreciate you keeping our independence and, working us from there. Of course, we can't do this show without our friends that take part in the News Roundtable, so we'd like to thank Chris, Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, for taking part in the News Roundtable with your dad. Always is good debate and fun there from the guys there. Right, well, I think that just about wraps up episode 437 of the ICQ podcast. And as I say, Dan, I know you're very busy at the moment. You've mentioned already earlier in the show about all the things you've got going on. But as I say, the most important job I would suggest you have to do every week is to make Mrs. B a cup of tea and find her hopefully a treat in the cupboard that, as I say, is there for her.
We certainly will, Colin. The cup of tea, the chocolate biscuits are ready, and Mrs. B and I are going to have a cup of tea and just chill out a bit more today. So, all good, Colin.
All good. Well, fantastic. Well, say, have a great weekend. And as I say, everybody, we'll catch you again in a fortnight's time. 73's all.
Yeah, 73.